We've had the war on drugs, we've had the war on terror. According to Tim Price, we're now at the beginning of the war on cash. Politicians are good at starting wars. Sadly, they seem to be completely useless at ending them. And they're also not terribly good at winning them. At least that's what I'm hoping, having read Tim Price's new book called, appropriately enough, The War on Cash. Tim's a great friend of Elite Investor Club, and when I interviewed him in depth 18 months ago, he was already fretting about what he then called financial repression. By the time he spoke at last November's Elite Investor Summit, his language had hardened, and the book is now subtitled How to Survive Financial Martial Law. There's lots of evidence to support his pessimism. As an investment manager, his day job is looking for the best places to protect and grow his clients' funds. How can you make sensible choices when asset prices everywhere are being manipulated within an inch of their lives by the policies of central bankers and their political puppet masters? The years since 2008 have brought new meaning to the notion of centrally managed economies. Marx and Lenin would have looked on in admiration at the way the Fed, the ECB, the Bank of Japan and the Bank of England have meddled in the free markets. As Bones might have said to Captain Kirk, "It's capitalism, Jim, but not as we know it." A crisis brought about through too much debt has been addressed by more debt. For example, 67,000 property developers in Spain are now technically insolvent, but they're not bankrupt because the banks have thrown them a lifeline. More debt. With houses already too expensive in the UK, the government's answer is a scheme that helps burden our young people with even more debt just so they can get on the ladder. Tim calls it indentured servitude. So where is it all leading? With a quarter of government bonds now offering negative interest rates and high street bank accounts as close to zero as makes no difference, it's time to think differently about what we do with our cash. The lessons of Cyprus and Greece are clear. When the next crisis happens, it will be bondholders, shareholders, and even depositors who take a haircut. Why run the risk for such a lousy return? Your cash is safer under the mattress or in a safety deposit box that's not controlled within the banking system. Tim goes further, almost mimicking American survivalists with a plan to have food, water, cash and gold in the cupboard in time for when the rioting starts on the streets. My own new report for members, 7 Steps to Financial Freedom the Professionals Don't Want You to Know About, covers similar ground, the need for an escape plan. Not just in the case of the Armageddon that Tim fears, but if the tax burden gets beyond bearable. For many, it's already reached 60% before you start paying 20% VAT on what you buy with the 40% that George has left you. What's your personal tipping point? 50%? 75? When President Hollande introduced his 75% solidarity tax, there was a mass exodus of wealthy French. The highest profile might have been Gerard Depardieu's move to Russia, but believe me, there were thousands more who escaped under the radar. I've never seen so many high-end apartments for sale in Paris at one time. Back in the 60s, it was actually much worse. An effective tax rate of 95% meant that sports and showbiz people would disappear to France for a full tax year as they tried to hang on to earnings from their all-too-brief top-line careers. Watch out for more suggestions of a move to digital cash and away from the old-fashioned paper money. Once it's entirely digital, you lose all control over it, and negative interest rates can be applied to force you to spend it rather than hoard it. It's as big a threat to our freedom as Cameron's attempts to castrate the Human Rights Act. But will the giant sloth of British public opinion rise from its slumbers on the sofa to push back against it? That gasping sound you hear is me holding my breath in eager anticipation of the big fight back. If you think we can sleepwalk our way into the abolition of cash without serious consequences for our freedom, be very careful out there. And then there's ISIS. When tech-savvy youngsters fall in with an evil regime of brutality masquerading as a religious cause, the result is a sophisticated online platform for finding, grooming and recruiting the next batch of killers and their sex slaves.